Maria, very good morning to you.
Good morning.
There are people who will say the government is using the private sector to get themselves out of a massive hole because they haven't invested correctly in the National Health Service. How would you respond to that, given that we're now seeing a whole range of private companies now possibly going to be used to reduce government waiting lists?
Well, we're putting record levels of investment into the NHS. It will be £190 billion a year by the end of this Parliament. But using independent providers has always been the case in the NHS. If you look at GPs, for example, most GP practices are independent businesses that take on NHS work. They're not directly employed by the NHS, and the same is true for dentists. Most dentists are independent businesses that take on an NHS contract if they want to do NHS work. We employ very few directly employed dentists. And so this is just an extension of that. And for patients, it will feel no different. It will still be free at the point of use. They'll be able to go to their GP and be referred to these community diagnostic centres, which will offer a range of tests, the majority of which will still be NHS run. We've only got 4 at the moment that independently run, and the 13 that we're announcing today, there'll be 8 of those run by the independent sector who have capacity. And I think for patients who are waiting for things like CTs, MRI scans, procedures, what they want to know is how quickly they can get those tests done. And if we can do that through the independent sector via the NHS, then absolutely we should do.
Let me ask you, though, about the NHS, because so many people will say, why haven't you solved the pay disputes where doctors are asking to be kept up with inflation? We need to pay our doctors arguably more in order to persuade more people to come into the profession. We seem not to be paying them enough, they would say. And also they would say the government has diverted its attention on other matters and hasn't really picked up the issue of solving, not only providing proper healthcare at doctor level, but then also hasn't solved the problems of crisis within A&E and indeed in hospitals. It's not a great track record on health, is it?
Well, we have resolved the majority of the pay disputes with the NHS. Only last month, we resolved the pay dispute for over 1 million NHS workers, including nurses and physios and radiotherapists, by giving them a 5% pay rise, which was accepted by the Staff Council and the majority of the unions there. The dispute between junior doctors and consultants isn't about matching pay with inflation. They're asking for 35%, which would be roughly about £15 billion that we'd have to find to pay for that. So that it's not small beans by any stretch of the imagination. We are offering a 6% pay rise. That's on top for consultants of a 4% pay rise last year. And we have to be, this is taxpayers' money. We have to be responsible. An announcement we're making today around the 13 community diagnostic centres, if we spent that money on pay instead, that would be less frontline services available for patients. And you say about our track record, if you look at what we've done in the last few months, we've actually eliminated the 2-year wait for tests and procedures, and we've virtually eliminated the 18-month wait. And now our focus is on those patients waiting 15 months or more.
Okay.
So our absolute focus is on getting waiting times down for patients, which is their priority, because the first thing they ask me is, how long am I going to have to wait? And by opening up new community diagnostic centres, we're tackling that problem head on.
Latest figures show that 7.47 million people, that's more than 1 in 8 of the population, are on waiting lists. How long until we get the situation under control?
Well, we're dealing with it in terms of how long patients are waiting. So if you ask a patient what their main priority is, it isn't who else is on the waiting list with them, it's how quickly they will get their test done. And that's why our focus has been on eliminating that 2-year wait, virtually eliminating the 18-month wait, and now getting it down to 15 months or less. In Labour-run Wales, for example, though, because we only run the health service in England, there's over 30,000 patients still waiting for 2 years or more for tests or procedures. So if you compare us to our neighbours, actually we are making significant improvements, and that is our focus, opening up capacity and making things quicker and easier for patients, recognising that the challenges that strike action actually does bring to getting those lists down even further.
Let me just ask you about another couple of questions, if I may. How on earth can we have a situation that the Prime Minister's house seems not to be safe, protesters can get onto his roof and they can drape flags and seemingly without punishment. And then, of course, they get arrested, fine, and then released within 24 hours, ready to go and protest again. It would appear as if there's been a massive breach of security.
Well, the fact that they have been arrested and they're actually out on bail, is my understanding, is because we've introduced new legislation in recent weeks and months through the Police Crime Sentencing Courts Bill, which Labour actually opposed. But it's through that new legislation that we are seeing protesters being arrested, and we've seen protesters recently sent
But this
to
is
prison
about
too.
protecting the Prime Minister's home. The police have failed. Surely you should not, as a member of the public or a protester or anybody else, be able to get onto land that is ostensibly or arguably the Prime Minister's house.
Well, I'm not going to comment on the private security arrangements of the Prime Minister, but I will say that protesters are not just targeting MPs and the Prime Minister, but the general public as well. We've seen the footage of them blocking roads, blocking sporting events, making it very difficult for people. They're losing the hearts and minds of individuals, and that's why we took the tough decision to bring in new legislation, which we got a lot of flack for. People said, it's their freedom to protest, but actually there are security issues on this and safety issues as well. And I know those people mean well in what they're campaigning for, but targeting individuals, targeting people who are trying to get to work, targeting sporting events is not the way to do it.
Just finally to you, if I may, we have seen, TalkTV has seen exclusive footage of an anti-ULEZ activist removing enforcement cameras in under 30 seconds from a junction in Bromley. Of course, we don't condone or promote illegal activities of this particular group, the Blade Runners. ULEZ, though, do you support the imposition of ULEZ? Do you think that we will see more of this kind of action?
The Conservatives have been very vocal in opposing ULEZ. That's why we did well in Uxbridge in the recent by-election, taxing people, particularly at this time where the cost of living is so tough, and have no option in many cases but to drive and use their cars, is not the right way to convince people to change their behaviours. If you look at what we're doing nationally, we want to phase in changes to vehicles. The way to do it is not to impose a tax, and it's not a small tax. It's hundreds of pounds a month for ordinary families to have to find in the Greater London area. I've got constituents, I'm in Sussex, but who travel to work in London, outer London, who are going to have to pay this. And Labour have made a huge mistake in this. And the point is, if that's what they will do when they're in power in London, what would they do if they ever got into government for the rest of the country? And that's the nervousness people have over Labour. Their solution to everything is to tax people into changing behaviour. That's not the way we want to do things.
Would you abolish ULEZ?
Well, certainly the mayoral candidate for London for the Conservatives has said that that's her first priority, and so people have an option there in the mayoral elections next May, is to have a Conservative mayor who says that that's one of her first priorities to change that.
There we go, Maria Caulfield, MP, Health Minister. We know that you have to go elsewhere. Thank you very much indeed for joining us here on Talk.